My name is Amy Jacobson. I'm the Executive Director here at Prairie Action ND, and we are excited to be kicking off our series that will run now through the legislative session to talk with people in North Dakota about the issues that they care about most and how they can be a part of creating change to make sure the people in North Dakota have the best lives that they possibly can. And that's why we're excited to have you here today and our experts, campaign members who are going to be talking about the ballot measures. So I'm going to start just walking us through the ballot measures, but first one we're going to talk about today is Measure 2. Measure 2 on the ballot, which would, the description of Measure 2, and I'm not going to read the actual language, but we can provide that in the follow-up for all of these measures. But basically, Measure 2 is going to limit the role that voters have in the decisions at the ballot box. Measure 2 would change North Dakota's constitution, so it's a constitutional amendment that would restrict voters' ability really to change our state constitution through the ballot initiative process. One of the key components of that Prairie Action is most concerned about is that this measure would require that voters have to vote twice in order to enact a ballot measure. So it's kind of getting at that, eliminating the sacred principle of one person, one vote, and requiring us to vote twice in order to enact a law. And so that's where we stand on the issue. So today we invited Dustin Gawrylow, who's a managing director for North Dakota Watchdog Group, but he's also a longtime political consultant and working with a couple of other ballot measures who are also working to oppose Measure 2. So we've invited him here today to talk a little bit more about the ballot measure. Dustin, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Measure 2 is the latest in a long line of legislative attacks on the ballot measure process. If you go way back, it's kind of a tradition in North Dakota for the legislature to try to make it more difficult to do ballot measures, going all the way back to the 1920s as a reaction to the NPL and the early days of ballot measures. But Measure 2 has several components that are problematic. The first one I'm going to talk about is the single subject rule, because it's the one component that on its surface sounds good, but it is kind of a Trojan horse type of component because there's no definition to what a single subject is. Currently and for decades, the legislature has been subject to their own single subject rule, but as we saw this last year, they have been unable to follow it themselves. The Supreme Court was put in a position to overturn the passage of the OMB bill, which was passed during last session because the Retirement Board sued the legislature for violating their own single subject rule. And then they had to go into a special session to fix that. Because there's no definition, it gives sole unilateral power to the Secretary of State to decide whether a measure fulfills the single subject rule. In South Dakota, most recently, there was a big abuse of this power, which was in 2020, the voters approved recreational marijuana and medicinal marijuana and industrial hemp, but the governor and Secretary of State sued after the fact to have that overturned, and the Supreme Court there overturned the will of the people. As a result, the entire election of 2020 on that issue was overturned. Here in North Dakota, one example that I use that this could be a problem is, say, for conservatives at least, because that's what I work with. Say somebody wanted to put a measure forward to abolish the income tax and reduce the sales tax by a penny. Is that one issue taxes, or is it two issues, income tax and sales tax? We don't know. The measure doesn't say. It would be entirely up to Secretary of State to decide. The second major provision, as Amy was discussing, is the double vote rule, which requires both a simple majority on the June primary ballot and the November primary ballot. This basically gives the lower turnout election in June the ability to prevent the higher turnout election in November from having a chance to even vote on an issue. This actually goes counter to a lot of the direction that the legislature has been going in the last decade, which back in 2014, they tried to put a measure on the ballot requiring that all constitutional measures go on the November ballot because there's higher turnout. That got defeated because there was another provision that they included on that, which also probably would have violated the single subject rule. And so this actually goes the other direction. It empowers the primary election voters, which is a lower turnout election in general. So it would allow fewer people to decide for everybody. Another provision on constitutional measures is it increases the threshold necessary for signatures from 4% to 5% of the population. That would make it so that measures have to get a lot more signatures. It would force committees to raise more money, and it would draw in more of that out-of-state money that the legislature claims they don't like, but they actually don't want to address it directly. Measure 2 in general, I believe, would empower the very out-of-state entities that the legislature claims to not like, because it punishes grassroots organizations that don't have a lot of money and can't raise $1 million or $5 million to get a measure on the ballot. But any organization that can raise $1 million or $2 million can raise 3 or 4. So it actually punishes actual citizens who want to initiate measures, and benefits the out-of-state entities that want to come in. So it's actually the opposite of what they intend to do with this, or at least what they claim to intend to do with this. Even Kelly Armstrong, the Republican nominee for governor, at the debate this week said it does nothing about out-of-state money. So if you hear legislators claiming that that is a reason to vote for Measure 2, they're just flat wrong. Even the Republican nominee for governor says they're wrong on that. Another provision that this would require is it currently in statute, there is a provision that requires that all signature collectors be in-state residents. That is already in law, but because of a ruling last year in South Dakota, which overturned the similar law, one of the reasons the legislature wants to put this into the Constitution rather than just into the Century Code is the theory that if it's in the Constitution, it will have a better chance of withstanding legal challenge in federal court. It's kind of one of those things that goes counter to what they've claimed to support in the realm of like Citizens United, where they want to make sure that everybody in America has the ability to influence anybody's laws in any state. In this provision, it's trying to limit that because they prefer to let the money in and not the people. Some other minor changes in this relative to those major ones are that it adds the word qualified to the word elector. That may or may not have any significant difference. Another one is it changes shalls to must, which is this discussion going on with the lawyers involved in legislation. And then one area where it probably has the most impact is it changes the word post office to residential when referring to addresses. And that could have a negative effect on folks who are rural or especially Indian reservations, where they may not have the same sort of residential addressing system that everybody else has. And so it kind of feeds into that longstanding fight that Republicans have been trying to push as far as voter ID, and creates a more a distinguishment in the Constitution as far as who can both sign a petition and who can circulate a petition. So overall, because of the lack of definition on the single subject rule and the double vote requirement that allows fewer residents to actually have control over what ballot measures, especially constitutional measures, get passed, as well as the other provisions, this is just another bad attack on the process to make it more difficult for grassroots citizens to influence the government. As a conservative, I believe that the initiated measure process, the purpose of it is to set the terms and conditions for our elected officials. And when the elected officials continuously try to give citizens and voters the opportunity to vote away their own rights, they're actually going counter to their own constituencies, which have, in North Dakota's case, put them into supermajority power. We have a legislator and legislature that trusts the voters to vote them in, but does not trust them to do anything else, basically. With that, I will.
I was perfect timing. I was just going to jump in with a question. I wanted to highlight a couple of the things that you brought up for our listeners today. First of all, the fact that you listed a whole lot of things that are within this ballot measure that are going to be amended in our state constitution. Particularly, it's ironic that it includes a single subject when we have this breadth of other changes that voters have to be paying attention to. So I think that is one thing that's really important for people to be thinking about. But the other thing that I've been hearing some ballot measures talk about is the fact that our state constitution directly in our state constitution gives people the power to initiate these ballot measures. And so this measure is actually stripping voters of our constitutionally protected rights in order to make it more difficult. One of the things that you talked about when you were presenting this information was the sort of political ideology of the folks who are opposing this ballot measure. Would you share with our group a little bit about the swath and different kinds of people who are standing up to oppose this ballot measure?
Yeah, the coalition against this measure is as diverse as you'll ever see in North Dakota. We've got former Governor Ed Schaefer. We've got is a Republican. We've got former Ag Commissioner Sarah Vogel, and we've got left and right organizations. This is one of those unusual issues where the left and the right meet up and agree, and it's the squishy middle that's the problem in general, that does not like the idea of the people telling them what to do specifically. And there aren't very many issues where you get hardcore conservatives and progressives, or whatever label you want to put on them, agreeing that it's just bad all around. I think that in general, this is one of those linchpin issues, and eventually there's going to be a need to prevent the legislature from manipulating Article 3 of the Constitution. The title of Article 3 is powers reserved to the people. It doesn't say unless the legislature disagrees, but that's how they operate. And until that is changed so that they can't get in and manipulate it, that we're going to have to fight these things over and over. The ability to change the initiative measure process should only be initiated itself within the process of getting signatures from the citizen level. So the coalition is wide, and ultimately we're going to have more work on our hands once we defeat Measure 2.
Very good. Thank you, Dustin, for sharing that information with us today. Like I said, everyone, we will, Caitlin's been, from our team's been popping links in the chat to Dustin's groups, to groups that Prairie Action is involved with, and other news articles around this issue so that you can dig deeper into that issue. And I appreciate, Dustin, your time here today to share that with us. We're now going to move on to Measure 4. Measure 4. So we're going to talk about, we have Allie Hoffman here with us today. So just let me start Measure 4. As you may have heard, because there's been quite a bit of earned media around this issue, it would eliminate property taxes in North Dakota. And if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, because this measure would be detrimental to our economy, our citizens, and our state as a whole, because there's really been no well-vetted plan to replace that estimated $1.5 billion that would happen if we eliminated property taxes. So we've invited Allie Hoffman. She's a political director at North Dakota United, who is also serving, I believe, as a campaign manager for Keep It Local, which is the main ballot measure organized to defeat Measure 2. So Allie, welcome to here this morning. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the first question and then let you just take it from there.
Sounds good.
But as a member of the coalition that is opposing Measure 4, what do you see as the most important piece of information that voters need to know about the negative impact of this measure?
So number one, thank you so much for having me here today to discuss Measure 4. I think it's interesting with this measure because depending on who you talk to, this conversation could go in 278 different ways of why it's bad for North Dakota. I think the main issue that we want to lift up is that this would cost our state $3.15 billion every biennium. So the measure requires that political subdivisions, so our counties, our cities, our schools, our parks, they're no longer allowed to levy property tax on the assessed value of a home. So the state is then required to pay that money out to our political subdivisions in perpetuity. So that would be written in our state constitution. We would have an appropriation written in our constitution set at 2024 levels forever. And so looking at our state budget, you'll often hear people say, well, the state budget is $19 billion, which it is. But of that state budget, there's some federal funds which can't be used to buy down property taxes. We have special funds which are already allocated. So what we're really talking about is the general fund budget, which is just a little over $6 billion. So this would require the state to take $3 billion out of a $6 billion budget to send to our political subdivisions to keep them whole. And again, that's written in our Constitution, would be required to happen. But I think we all know that you can't just wave a magic wand, find $3 billion, and everything will continue on with absolutely no impact. So, we would be looking at services cut. We would be looking at increased taxes, whether that's sales tax or income tax. We don't know. And that's the point number two is, this leaves a $3 billion hole in the budget with absolutely no plan to replace that $3.15 billion. You'll hear different ideas of what a plan is, but right now it's not written in there. And so we don't really know what that would look like, what taxes would be increased, what fees would be introduced, and what other ways this would impact us. You'll often hear people talk about, in order to have a robust, thriving economy, we need to have the three legs of the tax stool. So that's income tax, sales tax, and property tax. And while, we know there are issues with property tax, and there's conversations that need to happen. There's conversations that need to happen, and there's reform that can happen, but to completely take as Ellie Shockley put it in a letter in the Bismarck Tribune, to take a sledgehammer to an issue when really a scalpel is necessary is not the way to deal with it. So I think, there are conversations that need to happen around property tax. There are issues that need to be addressed, but completely eliminating the entire system with no plan for how it happens is not the answer to the issues that people have with it.
Thank you, Allie. This is sort of along the lines of what I asked Dustin about earlier too, is that with your coalition, it seems to kind of just be an incredible group of people from all kinds of perspectives. Can you share a little bit about the Keep It Local coalition?
Yeah, so it's actually, when you were asking Dustin about that, I was like, sounds familiar. Our coalition, Keep It Local, at this point has 113 organizations from within the state of North Dakota that are members. So it really runs everything. So we have the AFL-CIO, the Teachers Union, North Dakota United. We have the Chambers of Commerce, the Greater North Dakota Chamber, as well as the local chambers. We have the Lignite Energy Council, the North Dakota Petroleum Council. We have grain growers, farmers unions, stockmen's associations, school boards. We have the Council of Educational Leaders. It's really, it's across the political spectrum. It's every industry in the state is represented. And it's a lot of people who don't get the chance to work together too often. When we launched our campaign in June, it was 64 organizations, which felt big at that time. But we've almost doubled that. So needless to say, it feels quite large right now. But when we were launching this, Jason Bohr from the Lignite Energy Council said, it's nice to have an opportunity to work together. We are not a group of organizations that often get to stand together and say, this is not the right answer for North Dakota. But right now we get the opportunity to work together, and it feels good to, kind of put our differences aside that we may have on other issues to work for the greater good of the entire state.
That's incredible. First of all, I commend you for that work, because that is incredible to get that many groups working together in opposition. And I think it is very telling for our voters to be able to see that and be able to align with somebody or an organization within your group and feel comfortable with that message that's coming from them. I was wondering, one of the things, we are looking, there is, obviously the proponents to this measure. Would you tell us a little bit about the proponents, and can you respond to their message that we can do this, we can eliminate property taxes without increasing other taxes and without losing any of our needed services?
Yeah, so I think the proponents putting this message forward, I think obviously when you talk to people across the state, there is major frustration with property taxes. And we recognize that. And the Keep It Local coalition is not trying to tell people that everything is hunky-dory and everything is perfect and people shouldn't be upset. There are, especially in, different counties, there are issues that are coming up. But I think, the proponents were able to use that anger and frustration that people have to get this put on the ballot. And, they did do a signature gathering and got it on the ballot. And I think, there's a lot of messaging you will hear. Like I said, people saying our state budget is $19 billion. Yes, it is. But when you break it down, we're really talking about the general fund. And this is half of that. So we're a commodity driven state. A lot of our economy is based on commodities and the prices of those commodities. So while things could go well now, we don't know what this looks like in 5, 10 years down the road. And I think, you can point to different issues, and you'll hear the proponents talk about pork and wasteful spending. And I think everybody on this call could probably sit down and look at our state budget and pick out different things that we consider waste and we consider pork spending, or whatever you want to call it. But to have $3 billion of our budget cut every 2 years isn't just going to take away what some may consider pork or wasteful spending. It's going to impact our services. Our biggest line item in our state budget is our health and human services budget. So to say that we can take half of that general fund away without it impacting any services is just not going to happen. We will see increased fees and taxes and municipal fees, or we'll be seeing snowplow fees. We don't know what it looks like. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is this keeps the budget set at 2024 levels, but we live in an inflationary world. What we were paying for things in 2010, what we were paying for things in 2019 is not the same as what we're paying today in 2024. And so there's no mechanism to adjust for inflation in this. And so some of our rural communities that don't have things like a sales tax base aren't going to be able to keep up with the increased costs of, living in that community and keeping that community, filled with good roads and police or sheriff and firefighters, rural firefighters to come when emergencies arise. So while we may have the money for the next 2-4 years and it could be good, we don't know what this looks like in the long term because there's too many unknowns with this measure. And especially looking at, as the measure 2, as Dustin was talking about, if this measure passes and if measure 2 passes, which I hope it doesn't, but if both measures were to pass, it would be nearly impossible to undo this in the future. So again, it's taking a sledgehammer when a scalpel needs to be used. It is an issue that needs to be addressed, but completely tearing down an entire system is not the answer.
Thank you so much for all that really good information and for all the work that I know that you're putting into this, because fighting these, terrible ballot measures is all consuming, and the amount of work that needs to go into reaching all the voters is really important. So thank you for that. Like I said earlier, Caitlin has been putting all the links that we've been provided into the chat there for the coalition that's working in opposition, their social media handles, so that folks can go ahead and follow them on those channels to make sure that you're continuing to learn. And thank you for your time, Allie. We're going to move on to our next speaker, and we're going to talk a little bit about Measure 5. So Measure 5, as folks probably know, would legalize recreational marijuana for adults in North Dakota. It would allow individuals to possess up to an ounce of marijuana, 4 grams of concentrate, and 300 milligrams of edibles. It would also mean individuals can grow up to 3 plants with a limit of 6 plants per household. And today we have with us Tanya Johnson-Martinez. Tanya is an attorney here in North Dakota with nearly 20 years of legal experience. And she is also a coalition member with the measure working to pass this ballot measure. So we're looking towards a yes vote this time from our perspective. And that is called New Economic Frontier. So welcome, Tanya. I think you need to take your mute button off, and then we'll be good.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for joining us. I'll just go ahead and jump in with our first question, and you can take it from there and just tell us everything you want us to know. But as a member of a coalition that worked to put Measure 5 on the ballot for voters, what do you see as the most important piece of information that voters need to know about why it's needed?
Well, I'm going to come at this from a prosecutor's perspective because that is what I've done most of my career. I prosecuted property and personal crimes in Cass County from 2008 to 2021. During the entire time I was there, I also headed up a drug court. I was the prosecutor on one of them. There are 2. So I've got many years of exposure to addiction and prosecution and how it's impacted our judicial system. So I would want to consider the main points that I would want to get out would be resource allocation. We need to focus on serious crimes. Right now, we have an incredible fentanyl issue and better court efficiency. If somebody came to the court on any given day, you would see at the end of a court session that there are a number of cases that are just marijuana cases, just being called, just filtered through the system, paperwork that has to be filled out. There's also cost savings on incarceration. Right now, I can tell you that our Cass County Jail is stacked full. We do not have room for more people in there. They're building a new section, and I'm sure they'll find good ways to fill it, but it doesn't need to be with marijuana. So good on those points. I could talk about this forever. What do we go to next, Amy?
Yeah, well, so what do you think might be the most common misperception about legalizing marijuana?
Well, the conversations that I've had with friends, family, law enforcement, colleagues, everybody comes at it from a little bit different perspective. Law enforcement might be very worried about how it will impact safety in the community. But we've addressed those issues with the measure and with the language of it as far as not being able to smoke it in public, the different regulations that would make it safe and help keep it away from children. Right now, we have legalized alcohol, and we all know what happened when they tried to prohibit alcohol. It didn't stop alcohol, it just created a bigger black market for it. Right now, there is an incredibly large black market for marijuana. If it was legal recreationally, people would not have to worry about getting marijuana that has been tainted with pesticides or moldy. It's a safer product that would be uh, conducive to less emergency room visits, because when you take something and you don't know where it comes from, uh, you just don't know where it comes from. And unfortunately, in the business I was in, I saw a lot of things that weren't what they purported to be, particularly when the spice phase came over. If you're not familiar with the spice phase, it was incense essentially that was being sold, and it was sprayed with a chemical that mimicked the effects of marijuana, but it was not marijuana, and it was very damaging to the people that took it.
That's wild. I was also going to ask a little bit for our listeners, for you to tell us the name of your organization, or the advocates who are moving this forward, is the New Economic Frontier. Can you tell us about what that title means and what we should be thinking about more broadly when it comes to legalizing marijuana?
Absolutely. So I was very interested in becoming a part of this measure because of the diverse group of people that are involved in it. We have everyone from former Mayor Steve Bakken to conservative attorney Mark Freese. There are people that lean left as part of the measure, and that attracted me. I also liked the way that the bill was written. I'm a lawyer, so I focus very much on what the wording is, and I had some real concerns about the way the last couple of measures were worded. I don't think that they were bad, and kudos to those that were pushing the movement forward. But I have children, I have a grandchild, and I want my community to be safe. I don't want to go to the park and smell marijuana. So, New Economic Frontier organized together. They stand behind the premise that we're falling behind in tax revenue. We're falling behind other states. 4 months ago, Burgum asked state agencies to cut spending by 3% for the 25 to 27 biennium. The idea that more money isn't needed is uninformed and misguided. After listening to more information about the last two measures we discussed, I'm even more convinced that we need the revenue from this to help support those things that we could have. We need more infrastructure, we need better social services, education. I'm still part of the criminal justice system. I've just slipped over onto the defense side for more, uh, but I'm in the same line of work. My clients are ill, many of them. They need mental health treatment. They need drug addiction treatment. Marijuana is not the biggest issue that they have. We spend more time locking these people up and spend more money on incarcerating them than it would take to simply provide treatment. And not everybody, um, just like alcohol, not everybody is going to be able to handle recreational marijuana without it leading to addiction, like gambling, like sugar, like anything that is bad for us. Too much is not good. We need it in moderation. Montana generated $118 billion, million dollars in just 2 years. We know that people are traveling across the border to go to Montana and Minnesota and Colorado, and we know that it's probably people you know. It might be your kids, your friends, could even be your parents. Marijuana is just not the reefer madness that was put out in the 70s. And so I stand behind this. I want to see less people getting hooked up into the system because of uh, a fairly, in my opinion, innocuous drug. It's not going to kill you. Our kids are picking up fentanyl now, and they're stamped M30s. They're not real fentanyl, and you just never know when one is going to end your life. So that's what we should be focusing on, getting the hard drugs off of our streets.
Very good. So if you were going to do a quick synopsis, like your 5-7 word slogan as to why people should stand with the new economic frontier and vote yes on Measure 5, what would you say?
We need to move forward with the rest of the United States.
Very good. And I wanted to congratulate your campaign. I did see, I think the Fargo Forum editorialized today in support of your ballot measure. So that's a big win for you as well.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for being here today. Thank you for sharing your background and your experience and your reasons for supporting this ballot measure and for your time and working on it. We appreciate you being here today. And as I've been saying all along, Caitlin's been dropping all the information in the chat. So if you want to learn more about the new economic frontier, about the ballot measure itself, go ahead and go into the chat and we'll make sure to share those out. So thank you, Tanya, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. All right, we're doing so great on time. I want to thank everybody. We've got one more panelist, and this one is about Fargo Municipal Ballot Measure that Fargo voters will be casting a ballot on in the general election as well. And this one, oh, I lost my little sheet of paper. This one is Measure 3 in Fargo. So I have a couple different Measure 3s, not to complicate anything. But Measure 3 would implement a 20-year quarter-cent sales tax in the city to go towards funding the city's police and fire departments. Today we have with us Ron Guggisberg. Ron is a firefighter and he's a representative of the Firefighters Union, Firefighters Local 642. And Ron is also a former state legislator, is where I got to know him and do work with him, which has been great. Ron, I want to welcome you here today. I don't see you yet. Can you say hello?
Hello, thanks for having me.
Okay, I can't. Okay, I don't see you, so I'm just going to keep moving and assuming others can see you. Okay, there we go. Ron, okay, so I'm going to just kick you off with a question, but of course you can fill in with everything that you think is important for the voters in Fargo to know about this ballot measure and why they should be supporting it and supporting our police and firefighters. But as a member of the coalition that worked to, I guess, get this measure in front of people and on the ballot, what do you see as the most important piece of information that voters need to know when they're making their decision?
Well, thanks for the question. Yeah, so lately we've been knocking doors in the city of Fargo. It's a lot harder than a legislative race because you only had one district to work with, but now I got a lot more to do. But it's been great. That was always my favorite part of campaigning, was knocking on doors and talking to people. But there are things to explain that you can't really fit on a digital ad or a radio spot. So one thing I think that people need to know is where this came from. So we've been meeting for years with the city commission to address these budget issues, and they are budget issues. It seems like whenever it's reported, it's pay issues or things like that, but it really is a problem with the budget. When we had a strategic plan a couple of years ago for the fire department, we identified all these things, like a training facility we need. The cost of fire trucks has gone up. The truck I ride on right now is a $2 million truck. Everything's costing more. So at the end of that strategic planning, I asked, so how are we going to pay for this? And of course, that's something that we never want to talk about when we're planning for things like this, but it's something we need to talk about. And same with the pay. Last year, we met with some city commissioners and city management. Same thing. They said, hey, we want to get you up to average. We know we're falling behind. Thank you for, in the past, things like floods and flood protection and diversion and a pandemic. The employees have always just said, okay, well, we know you need to take care of these priorities, but someday it'll be our priority. And again, with this meeting, it was, so how are we going to pay for this? What's the budget capacity? And they right away want to change the subject. And then it comes budget time, and it's like, well, I guess we don't have any money for new positions. We don't have any money for job reclassifications. And so specifically for public safety, I sent a fact sheet out that hopefully everybody can take a look at. But in Fargo, we spend way less than any other city on police and fire. So as a percentage of general fund, which is probably the best way to measure public safety. And it's kind of like our pay. We're like, if you want to pick the cities you want to compare us to, go ahead. because we are last in all of those categories. So that's why that specifically. And then as far as when I talk to people at the door, they want to know, well, why do we have to pay for it this way? And the answer to that is basically property owners and business owners are tapped out. So a few years ago, there was, so Arlette Preston last year brought up the fact that we're spending more than we were taking in. And we've spent all of our reserves, including there was money available from when we were self-insured to Blue Cross Blue Shield. There's this big pile of money. We spent that. We had some other reserves. We spent that. And so Arlette was saying, hey, we need to look at this. We need to fix this. They did nothing. Eventually what they did was raise property taxes. And they said it was for public safety, which most of it didn't go to public safety. So this year they made cuts. We got rid of the DEI department, 3 positions in public health, and no new positions were added. So I would say we're having budget problems that the city is unwilling to talk about and unwilling to address. So by doing this sales tax, first of all, I did see in the chat that somebody was interested in the Bismarck public safety sales tax, and a lot of the same arguments go for that as well. I think theirs is a half cent. West Fargo has a half cent. Burleigh County, I believe, has 1 cent. And Williams County has 1 cent. That's just the ones I know of. So this is a pretty common thing. But what it does is, especially when cities get to a certain size and the property values no longer can keep up with the revenues they need, you need to go to sales tax. We have things like, people who visit here, people who shop here, college students, all these people aren't contributing to the cost of public safety, and that's what a sales tax allows. Yeah, I guess that's most of the things that I've been talking to people at the door with. I find that after I go through these things, just about everybody is like, yeah, I get it, that's a no-brainer. But like I said, it's hard for us to do that with a small digital ad on Facebook.
Right. It is a lot to explain. I did have a question for you too. Just like, what is your response when like the Fargo Forum editorializes against this ballot measure, and instead of like moving forward with supporting our safety through a sales tax, they're saying that the city just needs to reprioritize its budget. You've talked about how that seems to be a significant issue for the city right now. What is your response when you hear something like that?
Yeah, it didn't make sense, and we've had a few people publicly come out against this, and they all generally acknowledge that we need more funding for police and fire and city services in general, but they say it should be done another way. Well, the state law only allows cities to use property tax and a sales tax that has to be voted on by the people. There is no other ways. So when they say, they need to find a different revenue source, they're saying raise property taxes. And for the amount of revenue this quarter-cent sales tax would cost, that it'd be equal to about 10 mills. And that's the other thing. We hear that, the city needs to reprioritize, or the city needs to make more cuts. Even so, if there is waste in the budget, they can still look for that. There's nothing saying that once they put this money into police and fire, if there's no other uses for the money that's left over, we can use that to cut property taxes. In fact, I think that's what Burleigh County is doing with their sales taxes, using it to reduce the burden on property taxes and get everybody to pay their fair share.
Well, thank you, Ron, for all that good information. I appreciate you, explaining it a little bit more for everybody. And we have been putting your information in the chat. The fact sheet that Ron referenced is also in the chat. It's a PDF. It's open. So if you click on that, you should be able to see it, print it, share it, however you would like to, folks out there, to make sure in Fargo to support the measure. And thank you all for also answering the questions as far as other communities that are also working on an issue similar. So thank you for that. At this time, we do have just a few questions in the chat. So I'm going to have Sydney Stock from our team is going to go into the chat, see what she can pull out, and ask it of our panelists directed to either a specific panelist or whomever. So if it's your question, go ahead and take yourself off of mute and answer that question. Sydney, do you want to do that now?
Yeah, awesome. So question from Diana earlier on, she was asking who initiated Measure 2?
That came from the legislature. Yana Myrdal introduced the Resolution 4013 initially. The committees in the Senate and the House reconfigured it to end up what we have on Measure 2. So they put it directly on the ballot.
Thank you. Dustin.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you so much. We have a question from Vicky. This is for Allie. She asked, what self-interest factors motivate the lignite and oil industries to oppose Measure 4? She said, I always wonder what motivates the fossil fuel lobby.
Very good question. I think there's a lot of questions around what would happen to things like extraction taxes should the measure pass. And increases in that. But there's also concerns around, as I was saying earlier, the impacts that the funding cuts or, the inability to increase funding in rural communities in the future would have impacts on things like roads and schools. And it would make it hard to attract employees in Western North Dakota and in some of our smaller towns where they need to have those, draws to get people to come and work in these communities. As many people know, in rural America, schools are really the backbones of those communities. And this would have a huge impact on rural funding, especially in schools, and could force consolidation. And that makes it harder to recruit employees as well. So I think there's a number of concerns, but I would say those are the top two. But I think they've put out some press releases and some statements on their opposition to the measure. And I would encourage folks to look into that, or I can try and send it to Amy and her team afterwards. They did, I know the Petroleum Council did a panel on it at their recent summit out in Watford City, talking about their opposition to the measure. So I'll try and find that and send that over to the team so they can send it up in follow-up materials.
Sure. Yeah, we will definitely do that. Thank you, Allie. And then last question that I see here from Diana. This might be for Tanya. Why not decriminalize marijuana rather than legalizing it?
So it has pretty much been decriminalized in North Dakota, but it still results in law enforcement resources being diverted to issue that person a citation. There has to be a court time made for them. Then they have to appear. Then it's a financial burden on them. And, something that we don't talk about a whole lot is how it disproportionately affects our population with who's on the radar with respect to getting caught or having marijuana. And unfortunately, it disproportionately affects our Native American population, our minority population, just by virtue of it being, it's low-hanging fruit, right? If you can smell the marijuana, you've got your way into the house. And, people in North Dakota want their personal freedoms and privacy. And if you're next door in your house smoking marijuana, I don't care. And it shouldn't be decriminalized. It should be legalized, just like the other regulated intoxicant that we have, alcohol.
Sure. Thank you so much, Tanya. And then I wanted to note that for Ron, Tanya mentioned as a former public employee, I agree 100%. Fargo is losing great people due to these cuts that you were mentioning. So thanks you guys so much for asking questions. And if there's any more, we will send those out afterwards.
Thank you, Sydney, for fielding those questions. And we do have 1 minute. So I was going to see, Dustin, you had offered to talk a little bit, if you can keep it to just 1 minute, about the Bismarck tax.
Yeah, so there's an initiative measure on the Bismarck ballot. It creates a half-cent sales tax. Two-thirds or two-tenths of that would go towards public transit. 3/10 would go to public safety. Part of that public safety portion could pay for Bismarck's share of the detention center. In June, Burleigh County approved the 1 cent sales tax to take the sheriff's department, the jail operations, and state's attorney's office off of the property tax rules entirely, and it could complement that pretty well. So it's a half-cent tax, but it should be able to offset property taxes a little bit. So it's not an entirely new revenue. It's going to help bolster what's already there.
Thank you. Thank you for adding that. Okay, so we've reaching the end of our time together this morning. I again wanted to thank all of our panelists, just not for making time this Saturday morning, which we do greatly appreciate, but all the work you're doing to make sure that North Dakotans' best interests and our freedom and our safety are really taken care of during this election cycle. So thank you for that. I truly appreciate that. As a reminder, this has been recorded. It will be available for viewing after this, so we'll make sure to continue to get your message out from now until the election time. If you are willing to circulate this information as well, all of the people here today, that would be great, because the more people we can reach, the more people we can reach. And so I also want to, thank you to Allie, to Ron, to Dustin, and Tanya for being here today. I also wanted to thank our team who's been working hard to put this together and launch our first rebranded event of Amplify North Dakota. It used to be Solidarity Saturday. And so Sydney Stock and Caitlin Walksmith have put a lot of work and time and effort into this. You'll see their faces a lot as we move forward through the legislative session. So thank you to you all. And then just as a little note to you all, I can share with you the topics for the next 2 Amplify North Dakota events. They are on the 3rd Saturday for 1 hour at 10 a.m. of each month. And so next month, which is now November, I guess, we are going to be focusing, the topic is going to be From the Courtroom to the Capitol: The Future of Reproductive Health in North Dakota. We're really excited to be presenting that with a lot of really great partners. Also, just as a side note, when you think about who the prime sponsor of Measure 2 was, who is arch nemesis of reproductive rights, that might be another reason to vote against Measure 2, whatever her motive may have been. And then our December 1 is going to be Inside the Capitol: How the Legislature Works and How You Can Drive Change. There's always a lot of interest once we get to session to learn more about how we can amplify our own voices. So we'll make sure to educate the public on that. So with that, we're going to adjourn the meeting. Make sure to follow us on Facebook at Amplify North Dakota. And if you're interested, we do have a daily email news roundup that's curated that follows the values of our organization, which is freedom, fairness, democracy, and equality. So you can subscribe right there is the link there to Prairie Action ND's newsletter. We'll continue to bring important information to you and to your communities. So thank you all, and have a great rest of your weekend. Take care.